Downing Street is in hot water over allegations that it attempted to sweep under the rug the arrest of a close aide of the Prime Minister over a child pornography probe. The official, part of whose role was to advise online porn filters, was reportedly warned that police were investigating him hours before he was detained. RT's Laura Smith has the details.
His name is Patrick Rock, and he is in fact, though, a veteran Conservative Party advisor, David Cameron's Deputy Chief of Staff. He's been called Cameron's fixer, and he's had what one might call unparalleled access to power over a very long time, over the last 4 decades, right there in the heart of government. The irony lies in the fact that he's also been closely involved in drawing up government policy on internet pornography filters, and this is a man who was arrested recently on suspicion of what everybody's calling an offence related to child abuse images. So not just pornography, but what appears to be child pornography. Now, his arrest happened on February the 12th, and he then resigned, but this was all on the quiet. Downing Street appears to have covered it up until it was confronted with it now. So for the last 3 weeks, no one's known anything about this, but apart from the Prime Minister, who apparently has known for 3 weeks. He said he was very concerned that the matter should be handled correctly, that he didn't want to brief preemptively on a criminal investigation against a member of his staff. But his critics, who are mainly Labour members of Parliament, so opposition, say that this raises a number of questions. For example, what level of security did Patrick Rock have? Is there other stuff that we don't know about? It's also emerged, by the way, that Rock had previously been accused of sexual harassment, which was dealt with by his boss at Downing Street, so a political figure rather than a civil servant figure, not very usual. So again, some sort of oddity going on there. The Prime Minister's being accused of a cover-up, and his Labour critics say that this undermines the entire credibility and effectiveness of the government.
Are you aware of living paedophiles currently encircling Parliament?
Oh yes, there are several in Parliament at the moment.
Right.
And they're being blackmailed.
They are being blackmailed.
And it's a problem.
And by whom would they be blackmailed?
Well, it all goes back to Germany. The German intelligence are the classic users of paedophiles. The Germans understand paedophilia very well. I'm not saying all Germans are paedophiles, but
obviously.
The German intelligence have always understood paedophilia, and they've also had a good understanding of human nature and human weakness. It partly goes back to Freud, who was one of their intelligence advisors. He was one of their psychiatric advisors. The Germans have always had brothels, male brothels, in England. In the 1930s they had 3. There was one in Oxford, one in Cambridge, and one in London.
Right.
They also had female brothels as well. And
interesting dispersal there, really, isn't it?
Well, yes, and it's not... London is the centre of power. Oxford and Cambridge are the centres of education, or were then. And, of course, what the Germans are doing is spotting future leaders.
Right.
Ebert Heath was recruited at Oxford. He was recruited at Balliol in 1937.
Right.
Ebert Heath first met Adolf Hitler in 1937 at the Nuremberg Party rally.
I encountered Kenneth Clarke MP, and when I did so, and I met him at Ian Greer's office, he molested me. He put his hand on my penis and kept it there. They hadn't spoken to Kenneth Clarke MP, and they said they wouldn't be speaking to him because he was above the law. It was videotaped because it was the Cook Report. We videotaped everything. So we had a jacket camera and we had a suitcase camera. And when I was in the room, the suitcase camera I think went on the sofa opposite, and I had the jacket camera on. Now you can't see anything with the jacket camera because obviously someone comes in and touches you that way, but on the suitcase camera you saw it. And when I got the tapes back to the, we were staying in the place called the Hyde Park Residence, they played the tapes, and the producers sat there and they watched it, and I watched it. So I know that they knew that I'd been molested by Kenneth Clarke MP. John Major knew what we were doing, found out about it, and got Carlton Television, Carlton Communications, to buy Central Television to get hold of the Cook Report tapes, to get hold of the tape of Kenneth Clarke molesting me in Ian Greer's office as well. So these tapes were taken by Carlton Communications. John Major said, well, the scandal was so huge it was going to bring down the Conservative government, got Carlton Communications, who was a client of Ian Greer at the time, to do him a favour, which was to buy Central Television, which we were planning to do anyway, but much later. Because they were going to buy sort of all the little small independent television stations.
So you could get that film footage?
To get that film footage. Now, the man who did the actual getting of the tapes was Prime Minister David Cameron. He worked for Carlton Communications. He was Michael Green, the CEO's right-hand man, and he handled it. So when the police went to David Cameron to say about questioning Kenneth Clarke, guess what he said? No.
Well, first of all, this is from a very credible source. It's a member of Parliament. It's somebody who has been providing us some very important information over the last 4 years, about the work we're doing and the impact it's having. And he made it clear that his information was that they were considering it on the basis that the work we're doing is hitting very close to home, obviously. And it's no accident that it was announced that this sedition order was being considered the very week that we exposed, if you remember the announcement that came last Monday, when Joseph Ratzinger went to London, the first visit of a pope to England in history. On September 16th, 2010, he went to Holyrood Castle to meet with Queen Elizabeth, and they were closeted in there for, about a day or two. It turns out that from the same source, we discovered that Queen Elizabeth actually agreed to place all Anglican clergy under the Catholic policy known as Crimen Solicitanus. That basically orders Anglican priests now, along with Catholic priests, to cover up child abuse. What she just did by that was violated her coronation oath, where she swore to protect the citizens of England. She has agreed now to cover up child rape. This is like an official criminal conspiracy. And naturally, us exposing that puts them in a really dangerous position. She should, under British law now, be forced to abdicate, she and all her heirs, because she's, completely committed treason, in effect. Now, their backs are obviously to the wall on this, and they are now obviously getting some advice that I should be permanently silenced, because in order to stop this, which could lead to a whole chain of events which could topple the whole British monarchy. So, I'm not surprised in a way they're acting that way, but they've been striking at people around me as well. If you remember, 3 of our members over the last little while have been put in British or Canadian prisons on trumped-up charges. One man was put in a mental hospital for 3 days until we got him out, the fellow in London, David Compan. So, they've been hitting around us, but definitely this is aimed at trying to, stop this exposure of the direct link between the Vatican and the Crown in protecting child rapists around the world.
This is a change in legislation. I'll read it just for the people listening as opposed to viewing. But as of April 2009, because of a change in legislation being introduced by Jack Straw, the Justice Secretary, the media will no longer be able to identify those involved in cases such as the Websters. Now, the Webster case is a child court case, family court case. And then this absolutely blatant statement, so it continues, it will also be illegal for any children currently in care to speak out, even if they feel they're being mistreated.
I know, it sends a shiver up your spine.
Well,
that's Jack Straw, people.
What human being would want
Tony
to make
Blair's
it...
friend.
What human being would want to make it more difficult for young people to speak out if they're being... Surely the legislation should be to make it easier for them to speak out, isn't it?
What this man done is abnormal to decent human beings.
Yeah.
He should never have been allowed. Also, I think his son was caught dealing drugs as well, and his brother William was on the sex offenders register for assaulting. One was a violent attack on 2 girls, his brother William.
Right.
Now, this man should never have been given a job because he had a vested interest.
Or was he given the job because of the man he is? This is the question which I'm becoming interested in.
This is what it is. He's been pushed up front. You see, the paedophiles, especially that are within the institutions, there's a lot of Masonic goings on, you know the cults we were talking about, like Freemasonry and oaths that they take.
Secrecy is what you're getting at.
Secrecy, yeah. And the sexuality,
Sorry, you have to,
the table's sort of rocking, the sexuality of children.
And we did ask the Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg and former leader Lord Steele for an interview, but they were not available to appear on this programme. We're joined now from Birmingham by the Liberal Democrat MP John Hemming. John Hemming, this is a sorry tale for humanity, let alone for the Liberal Democrat Party.
Or the Labour Party, which were involved in talking to the DPP and stopping him being prosecuted. Yes, we shouldn't really worry about the party.
That's an important point, isn't it? Because, of course, that happened because there was a very, very narrow majority at the time, and Cyril Smith was it.
Well, no, actually, remember, Cyril Smith wasn't always a member of the Liberals. He was actually a Labour councillor for part of the time as well. And I don't think... We need to look at this from the point of view of how we stop cover-ups. Because you've got this situation, you've got what happens with Hillsborough, you've got current things like Michael Doherty's case. And it's far too easy for powerful people to get away with wrongdoing and nothing be done about it.
But are you sure? Because these days, I mean, like it or not, this would have found its way onto the internet. Somehow, in this much more liberated period, we would have found out about it.
Well, I am aware of things that are still kept secret by the use of court orders, for instance, criminal allegations which are being kept under wraps today, and obviously your editor doesn't want to go to jail, so I can't mention them.
Well, there are super injunctions, but they too had their day, sort of thing, didn't they? I mean, we can paint this into some kind of mass conspiracy. The real issue, surely, is the particular party which seems to have had an awful lot of problems in this direction, i.e. yours, really getting to grips properly with it.
Well, we need to make sure that when people commit criminal offences, that there is a mechanism, and I would argue through controls on judicial review. In fact, last year, one of my reasons why I'm not very happy at all with Nick Clegg is that he blocked my private members bill, which would have made it much easier for people to challenge a failure to prosecute. And so that the victims in these situations wouldn't have to wait 40, 50, 60 years for justice, but would be able to get it in the short term. And I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to look at society and see how often these cover-ups happen. We also need to look at what the involvement of the security services in this. Were they involved also in Kincora? I'm worried about what happened with Leah McGrath Goodman, who was banned from this country because she wanted to investigate Jimmy Savile. And that was before it became public, and I'm trying to investigate that at the moment.
Well, we'll keep in touch with you and see if you come up with anything. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, John Hemming. Thank you.
No problem.
I will try and talk to you about the story on two levels. There are two important levels in the story. One is the horror of the case itself that's been described by virtually every journalist as one of the most horrific of its kind ever in British history. And the other is the truly staggering lengths of the establishment in Scotland to cover this story up. It goes right to the top. It goes to Alex Salmond, the First Minister. I think one gentleman earlier on was saying how he saw the Question Time programme on Thursday night, in which Alex Salmond was speaking there. I can tell you that Alex Salmond is knowingly covering up for multiple child rape, rape of people with disabilities, and he's covering up for a murder as well. And he knows all about this, and he does not want his government to be embarrassed. That's the word, embarrassed.
Very fast-moving situation. This is the nub of it, is that Robert was arrested mid-morning on the 13th of February. That was by a combination of Cheshire police and police who travelled down from Aberdeen. And he was then taken north of the border. Now, initially, the reports, and we were getting reports from people very close to the case, including some family members. So the information they gave us appeared accurate. But it now has come to light that this is really what's going on, that Robert was taken north of the border, was subjected to a psychiatric examination. He was heavily questioned by the police about, amongst other things, Alex Salmond, and particularly the Violate S&M club, which I believe is based in Glasgow. But this questioning was not done as part of a formal police questioning session. And Robert has been visited now by somebody in prison, so we're pretty sure of the accuracy of the information we're getting now. And Robert still does not know the exact charge that has been used to arrest him in England and then imprison him in Perth. So he's on remand at the moment. We still believe that he'll be due back into court on Friday, but of course nobody has any idea of the charges. And at the moment, Robert still does not have access to his own legal representation, having a bad day today. But we know that steps are being taken to correct that as we speak. So if we just give a bit more detail to that, apparently he was arrested by 6 Scottish police, headed by a DI, Alex Drummond, plus 1 officer from Cheshire Police. Now, presumably the Cheshire Police were there to keep an eye on their Scottish brothers, who, of course, were operating in England. And we know he had his home searched. We know that computers and things were once again taken away. But we understand that this time the police were quite courteous with him, and we don't think he was even handcuffed, although obviously he was then bundled into a police car to be driven north. So he got to Queen Street, Aberdeen Police Station at about 7:30 p.m. that evening. He was checked in, and then a Dr. Weirden arrived, apparently to assess his mental state, followed by 2 lady psychiatrists. Dr. Weirden asked him if he wasn't rather overcommitted. So it appears to us, particularly with the experience of knowing how English social services will work to get mothers who fight for the safety of their children, to get those mothers sectioned, it seems to us that this was a pretty crude attempt to the Scottish establishment to have a go, certainly at intimidating Robert, and probably to see whether they could find anything in order to section him. But on this occasion, the 2 psychiatrists pronounced him fit. But around midnight, he was then driven to Cornhill Mental Hospital, where he was interrogated for an hour by a lady psychologist. But again, this time, nothing found. So he was then basically put through the courts, the sheriff court. And he's apparently, Robert has told his visitor that basically he had to hang about all day waiting for the case to come up, and it was only dealt with after everybody else seemed to have cleared those courts. So I think we get an impression as to what was going on, and we believe the sheriff who presided over his case is a Mrs. MacDonald, and it would appear that she was either drafted in from Dundee, which is what we originally heard, or possibly Perth. And we think that this special sheriff was because we understand that there's some consternation amongst the Aberdeen sheriffs who it would appear don't want to be involved with the case. So we'll leave that to your imagination. And I'll just end on a good note, is that when Robert was taken into Perth prison, he said he was greeted in a very positive way by both inmates and prison officers, who were clearly aware that he was coming, and he's received huge support, I will just say, from members of the establishment who absolutely know that basically Robert has been campaigning to take the lid off the paedophile networks operating through the establishment in Scotland.
So he hasn't been officially charged as of yet, and he hasn't been, he's not inside for, because there has been a blog go out today that he's in prison for a year.
No, that's not true. He's on remand. We understand the longest that he could be held for is 150 days, which is still a very long time. But basically he's on remand, and he's due to be brought back into, we think, Aberdeen Sheriff Court on Friday, although, as we're saying at the moment, there's no information on the charge. And I would very much like to thank Belinda for that very comprehensive report. There is a new website that's gone live, which is free Robert Greene. I think that's .co.uk, but if you search for Free Robert Greene in Google, you will find it. So what's been going on here? What's this man been doing? What's his real crime? He's consistently campaigned for Scottish police to fully investigate those named as abusers by Holly Gregg, and indeed Holly was also able to name other children who had been abused. And we simply ask, could the reluctance of the Scottish establishment to investigate be due to the fact that Holly named both members of the judiciary and establishment, and indeed the police? So, an unpleasant topic, and it really brings us on to this one.
This one, indeed, yes. It's come out that the Labour MPs have come out and apologised for being involved with PI, the Paedophile Information Exchange. And Brian's been doing some work on this morning, putting some pieces together.
Well, we decided the easiest thing was to take out the key pieces of the information in the paper, and this is really what they're talking about. They're talking about Patricia Hewitt, ex-MP now. She was working with Harriet Harman, MP, and we've got Mr. Jack Dromey as well involved, and this is the key organisation that all three of these people were involved with, the National Council for Civil Liberties. We're going back into the late 70s at the moment. Mike?
Yeah, Jack Dromey is Harriet Harman's husband, isn't that correct?
Indeed he is, yes. Thank you for reminding me of that. So here's the roles that we're looking at within National Council for Civil Liberties. And this is where it starts to get very mucky, because NCCL was involved, as Louise just said, with PI,
yep.
But also they were there with the left-wing magazine Rights. Now, this is information that's come out of the Daily Mail, very, very comprehensive article, so well done, the Daily Mail.
Well, you should be commending the column, because the column has been exposing this for a very long time.
Well, that's true, but I'm going to say praise where it's due, Lou. We know that we have got mainstream reporters who on this particular subject won't give up. But here's a quote from a gay paedophile involved with the Rights magazine, Mike Morton. Consensual sex between adults and children is simply people of different age groups being nice to each other.
Oh.
So it's pretty interesting stuff. So direct links between the National Council of Civil Liberty and the Paedophile Information Exchange, and what sort of thing was going on? Well, of course, legalisation of child sex, and they wanted the age of consent reduced to 4 years old. So this is a very, very interesting picture building up now. Police investigations going on, which we'll mention, around senior members, particularly of the Labour administration, but Harriet Harman, of course, deputy leader of the existing Labour Party. Exactly. So for viewers who are overseas, you're now starting to get a real snapshot into the quality of the people that we've got running Britain. And of course, we've seen over many recent months the establishment running scared of a full and proper police investigation into the high-level paedophile rings, particularly those around Elm House. So, can you tell us about this man?
Yeah, I had a little look a while back now on who was behind PI, and here we have this gentleman here. His name is Peter Wrighton. He is dead now, and he was actually the founder of the PI. And he linked very closely. We've got some quotes actually come up here now with links to Cyril Smith.
Well, this is the main bit.
The main bit is the victim who had pointed out about Cyril Smith and Peter Wrighton being at various parties. The victim said Wrighton's evil network stretched to the top of the UK establishment, and that he brought him into contact with fellow pervert MP Cyril Smith. So this then took me to another gentleman.
Can I just, sorry to interject, just mention here that, of course, it's top policeman Bernard Hogan Howe from the Met Police, who said that he's not going to investigate the paedophile activity around Cyril Smith. That's an interesting question for a policeman to say he's not going to investigate when we've got activity around politicians, albeit dead.
So after looking at Peter Wrighton, I came across this chap. His name is Charles Napier. He was a former teacher. He was let off so many times, ended up in other countries, foreign countries, ended up getting sacked from a few schooling jobs, then finding ways to get round through his connections back into schools. He was then eventually picked up, and this guy was the treasurer of PI, and I'm still doing a little bit more investigation on whether this guy is still inside or not, but there are links to, I believe, Sydney Cook as well. But I'm actually going to be speaking to Bill Maloney in person on Friday night, and that show's going to be aired live here at 5 o'clock. So we want to find out a lot more about this chap and Peter Wrighton.
Okay, well, let's come back to the main bit of the story here. So these are some statements made by Harriet Harman and Patricia Hewitt on the subject of the paedophile information exchange. So this one's from Harman, an annual report dated 1976. She describes PI in glowing terms as a campaigning counselling group for adults sexually attracted to children. And I'm going to say this is all information out of the Daily Mail article. Hewitt complains that PI had recently been the subject of a hysterical and highly inaccurate article in the Sunday People newspaper, headlined "The Vilest Men in Britain," and that was designed to foster misunderstanding and hatred as to what these men were up to. So 2 highly protective statements of PI by these 2 women. In 1978, the National Council for Civil Liberties submitted a briefing paper to Parliament on the upcoming Protection of Children Bill, which sought, amongst other things, to outlaw child pornography. Written by Harriet Harman, the briefing advanced an extraordinary argument that images of naked children should only be considered pornographic if it could be proven that the subject had suffered. So the onus was on a tiny child, and presumably their parents, to prove that paedophile activity had taken place. In 1976, NCCL lobbied for the age of consent to be lowered to 10 years and for incest to be legalised.
Whoa.
And in 1978, NCCL lobbied for child pornography laws to be relaxed. So we're not talking about a little bit of nibbling around the edges here. We're not talking about the age of consent being reduced to 15. We are talking about children as young as 4 being in the target of these people. And people supporting this are now in positions of power within Westminster and particularly within the Labour Party. But there was a bit more to the story, and it was that there at the moment is supposedly a thorough high-level government investigation. I think that's a bit of an oxymoron because I don't think we've ever seen a thorough government investigation. But they're looking at basically connections between Prime Minister James Callaghan, this man Merrill Rees, former Home Secretary. I believe he was also Northern Ireland Secretary at one point. But in his reign, public funds were actually being pushed through to the paedophile information exchange. I'm going to use the word alleged. It was alleged that public money was being pushed through to the paedophile information exchange. And this is the key bit. Police are now investigating the organisation as part of Operation Fernbridge, launched in the wake of the Jimmy Savile affair. Remember, Jimmy Savile tightly linked to the royal family, and in particular Charles. A senior source on the investigation says there is evidence that members of PI were abusing children on an industrial scale. And that, of course, is exactly what campaigners have been saying for many years. Bill Maloney, Pie and Mash Films, of course, has been one of the lead campaigners, a victim himself, so he knows full well what goes on. Robert Greene doing tremendous work to try and expose the abuse of Down syndrome girl Holly Gregg. And, of course, I think we're also allowed to say UK Column and many other free media organisations taking the lid off what's really happening. So we'll just leave you with a picture of Harriet. We're going to ask what's going on in Westminster. Are our children safe? Is the nation safe in their hands? And we just remind you here that this is what this lady thought. So that if you're taking images of naked children, you've got to prove that they've actually suffered. And this woman, deputy leader in the future, possibly leader of the Labour Party, possibly, if the British public allows it, a future Prime Minister.
Her position's got to be untenable now, doesn't it?
I would have thought so, unless the country is happy to move into a new phase of change and big society where the age of consent is 4 years old. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, what's going on?